The crimson glow of sunset bled into the dusty horizon as Emma Osbourne stumbled through the batwing doors of the Silver Dollar Saloon, her trembling hand pressed against her swollen belly. It was 1875 in Owyhee, Nevada, a mining town that had seen better days since the silver boom had started to wane. The 6-month swell of her pregnancy was impossible to hide beneath her threadbare dress, but desperation had driven her here, to the last place a respectable woman would be caught after dark. The saloon fell into a hush as Emma entered, the piano player's fingers stilling on the keys. Men turned to stare, some with pity, others with interest that made her skin crawl. She kept her eyes downcast, the shame of her circumstances weighing heavier than the child she carried. "Well, well," drawled Silas Jenkins, the saloon's owner, emerging from behind the bar with a predatory smile that didn't reach his cold eyes. "What brings a lady in your condition to my establishment?" Emma swallowed hard, the words sticking in her throat like glass. "I need work, Mr. Jenkins. Any work." Jenkins circled her slowly, his gaze traveling up and down her body with calculated assessment. "Work, is it? Not many jobs for a woman in your state, miss?" "Osbourne, Emma Osbourne." "Osbourne," he repeated, letting the name roll off his tongue. "Your husband run off, did he?" Emma's silence was answer enough. "I might have something for you," Jenkins said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Pretty thing like you could still earn your keep, baby, or no. Some men, well, they got particular tastes." The meaning behind his words was unmistakable, and Emma felt bile rise in her throat. But the alternative was starvation for her and her unborn child. She had tried everything else. The boarding houses wouldn't take her, the respectable businesses turned her away, and her meager savings had dwindled to nothing. "How much?" she whispered, hating herself for asking, for even considering it. Jenkins named his price for her freedom, for her body. It was an arrangement that would bind her to the saloon until her debt was paid, which they both knew might be never. But with winter approaching and no roof over her head, what choice did she have? "I'll give you time to think on it," Jenkins said, his hand lingering too long on her shoulder. "You can start tonight if you're agreeable." As Jenkins walked away, Emma sank into a chair in the darkest corner of the saloon, burying her face in her hands. She didn't notice the tall figure watching her from across the room, his eyes sharp beneath the brim of his worn Stetson. Grant Russell had ridden into Owyhee that morning, trail dust still clinging to his clothes, stubble darkening his jaw. At 32, he'd seen his fair share of the West's cruelty, but something about the pregnant woman's desperation struck him in a way he couldn't ignore. He'd overheard enough of her conversation with Jenkins to piece together her predicament. Grant took a long sip of his whiskey, considering. He wasn't a man who typically involved himself in others' affairs. 8 years of driving cattle and drifting from town to town had taught him to mind his own business. But as he watched Jenkins approach the woman again, saw her shoulders slump in defeat, something inside him shifted. Before he realized what he was doing, Grant was on his feet, striding across the saloon floor with purpose. He reached the table just as Jenkins was extending his hand to seal their agreement. "Pardon me," Grant said, his voice quiet but firm. "I believe the lady and I have some business to discuss first." Jenkins scowled. "This ain't your concern, mister. The lady and I have an arrangement." "Is that so?" Grant turned to Emma, whose wide blue eyes were now fixed on him with a mixture of confusion and the first flicker of hope. "Madam, I don't mean to intrude, but I overheard you're looking for employment." Emma nodded slowly, wary of this stranger's intentions. "I have a proposition that might interest you more than whatever this gentleman is offering," Grant continued, deliberately not looking at Jenkins. "My sister owns a ranch outside of town. She's expecting her first child and could use some help around the house. Room, board, and fair wages included." It was a lie, of course. Grant had no sister, let alone one with a ranch. But the falsehood came easily to his lips when he saw the desperate situation before him. Jenkins' face darkened with anger. "Now, see here, how much does she owe you?" Grant interrupted, turning to face the saloon owner. Jenkins named a sum that was far more than reasonable, clearly hoping to scare off the interfering stranger. Without hesitation, Grant reached into his vest pocket and withdrew a money clip, He counted out the bills, far more than he could truly afford to part with, and placed them on the table. "I believe this covers the lady's debt and then some," he said coolly. Jenkins's eyes narrowed as he counted the money. "This ain't about the money," she agreed. "She agreed to nothing," Grant cut in, his voice hardening. "And now she has a better offer." The saloon had fallen silent again, all eyes on the confrontation. Jenkins looked around, aware of the attention, then scooped up the money with a scowl. "Fine, take her. But don't come crawling back when you can't handle her situation," he spat before stalking away. Emma stared at Grant, disbelief etched across her features. "Why would you do that for a stranger?" she whispered. Grant's expression softened. "Let's just say I've seen enough injustice in this world. Now, shall we get you somewhere safer to talk?" Emma hesitated, studying the man before her. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with kind eyes that crinkled at the corners. His clothes were worn but clean, and there was something in his demeanor that spoke of honesty. "You don't really have a sister, do you?" she asked softly. A smile touched Grant's lips. "No, madam, I don't. But I do have a room at the boarding house, and you're welcome to it for the night. I'll find other accommodations." "I can't take your room," Emma protested. "You can, and you will," Grant insisted. "It's getting late, and you need rest." He offered his arm. "Shall we go, Miss Osbourne?" Tentatively, Emma placed her hand on his forearm. "Emma," she said. "My name is Emma." "Grant Russell," he replied with a nod. "Pleased to make your acquaintance, though I wish it were under better circumstances." As they exited the saloon, the cool night air washed over them. Emma shivered, and Grant immediately removed his coat, draping it around her shoulders. "That's not necessary," she said, though she pulled the warm garment closer. "Where I come from, it is," Grant replied simply. They walked in silence down the main street of Owyhee, the sound of their boots on the wooden boardwalk, the only noise in the quiet night. The town was settling down, lights winking out in windows as residents retired for the evening. "Why did you really help me?" Emma asked as they approached the boarding house. Grant considered her question. "I've seen too many good people forced into bad situations," he finally said, "and I couldn't stand by and watch it happen again, not when I could do something about it." Emma studied him in the moonlight, trying to detect any hint of deception. Finding none, she simply nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Russell." "Grant," he corrected gently. "And you're welcome, Emma." At the boarding house, Mrs. Whitaker, the elderly proprietress, raised an eyebrow at the sight of Grant returning with a pregnant woman. But she asked no questions. Grant paid for another night in the room and requested fresh linens. "I'll be back in the morning," Grant told Emma as they stood outside the room. "We can figure out what's next then. For now, get some rest." Emma hesitated at the threshold. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "There's nothing to repay," Grant assured her. "Good night, Emma." As Grant turned to leave, Emma called after him. "Where will you sleep tonight?" He glanced back with a slight smile. "I've bedded down under the stars more nights than I can count." "The livery stable will be downright luxurious by comparison." Before Emma could protest again, he tipped his hat and disappeared down the stairs, leaving her standing in the doorway of a room that represented more safety and kindness than she'd known in months. Inside, Emma sank onto the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the day's events. Her hand moved instinctively to her belly, feeling the baby shift beneath her palm. "It's going to be all right," she whispered, though she was far from certain of that herself. "Someone kind has found us." As she lay down on the clean sheets, Emma couldn't help but wonder about the stranger who had come to her rescue. Grant Russell wasn't like any man she'd encountered before. There had been no expectation in his eyes, no hidden agenda she could discern. Just simple human decency. Something she'd almost forgotten existed. Morning came with golden light filtering through thin curtains. Emma woke to the unfamiliar comfort of a real bed, momentarily disoriented until the previous night's events came flooding back. She sat up slowly, her hand instinctively cradling her belly as she took in her surroundings. The room was simple, but clean, a far cry from the places she'd been forced to sleep in recent weeks. A basin of fresh water sat on the dresser, alongside a bar of soap and a clean towel. Someone, Mrs. Whitaker, she presumed, had left them while she slept. Emma washed her face and hands, combed her fingers through her tangled auburn hair, and straightened her wrinkled dress as best she could. She had just finished when a soft knock came at the door. "Who is it?" she called, caution still her constant companion. "Grant Russell, madam." Relief washed over her as she opened the door, to find Grant standing there, looking fresher than the night before. He'd shaved, and his clothes, while still worn, were clean. In his hands he held a small bundle wrapped in brown paper. "Good morning," he greeted her with a nod. "I trust you slept well?" "Better than I have in weeks," Emma admitted. "Thank you again for your kindness, Mr. Grant." He smiled at her correction. "I brought you something." He handed her the package. "Nothing fancy, but I thought you might appreciate a clean dress. The general store didn't have much in the way of accommodating your condition, but the shopkeeper's wife helped select something that might work." Emma unwrapped the package with trembling fingers to find a simple calico dress in a soft blue, modestly cut but with enough room to accommodate her growing belly. Beneath it was a shawl in a deeper blue. "I can't accept this," she said, even as her fingers traced the clean fabric longingly. "You can, and you will," Grant replied, echoing his words from the night before. "Consider it a practical necessity, not charity." Emma opened her mouth to protest further, then closed it. Pride was a luxury she could no longer afford, not with a child to consider. "Thank you," she said instead. "I'll wait downstairs while you change," Grant offered. "Then, if you're amenable, I thought we might have breakfast and discuss your situation more thoroughly." After he left, Emma changed quickly, relishing the feel of the clean fabric against her skin. The dress fit reasonably well, a bit loose in the shoulders, but with room for her to grow. She wished for a mirror to see herself properly, but had to make do with smoothing her hands over the fabric and hoping she looked presentable. Downstairs, Grant was waiting in the small parlor of the boarding house. He stood when she entered, and something in his expression, a fleeting look of admiration, made her cheeks warm. "The color suits you," he said simply. They walked to a small cafe down the street, where Grant ordered them a hearty breakfast. Emma tried not to eat too quickly, though it had been days since she'd had a proper meal. Grant pretended not to notice her hunger, engaging her in casual conversation about the town and the unseasonably mild weather until her plate was clean. Only then did he broach the subject of her circumstances. "I don't mean to pry," he began carefully, "but if I'm to help you, I should know more about your situation." Emma stared into her coffee cup, gathering her courage. "It's not a pleasant story." "Few true stories are," Grant replied gently. Taking a deep breath, Emma began. She'd come west 2 years ago, answering an advertisement for a mail-order bride. Edward Holloway had seemed kind in his letters, a shopkeeper in a growing town who wanted a wife to help with his business and start a family. But the reality had been far different. "He wasn't cruel exactly," Emma explained, her eyes still downcast. "Just cold, controlling. His business was failing, and he blamed everyone but himself. When I became pregnant, he seemed to resent me. Then one morning 3 months ago, I woke to find him gone. He'd taken everything of value, including my wedding ring. Left a note saying he couldn't support a family and was heading to California." She looked up to find Grant watching her intently, his expression unreadable. "I managed for a while on what little savings I had hidden away. When that ran out, I tried to find work, but no one wants to hire a pregnant woman abandoned by her husband. I've been moving from town to town, trying to stay ahead of hunger. He was my last hope." "And that's how you ended up at the Silver Dollar," Grant concluded quietly. Emma nodded, shame coloring her cheeks. "I never thought I didn't want to—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "You don't need to explain," Grant assured her. "Desperation drives good people to consider options they'd never otherwise contemplate." "What happens now?" Emma asked, finally meeting his gaze directly. Grant leaned back in his chair, considering. "That depends on what you want, Emma. Where were you heading before Owyhee?" "Nowhere in particular," she admitted. "Just somewhere I could start fresh, where no one knew me or my circumstances." "I have a proposition for you," Grant said after a moment. "A genuine one this time." Despite herself, Emma felt a smile tug at her lips. "No fictitious sister this time?" "No," Grant chuckled. "The truth is, I've been drifting too long myself. I came to Nevada to look at a piece of land north of here. I've saved enough over the years to buy it and start a small ranch. It's nothing grand, but it's good land with water rights, perfect for raising cattle. That sounds like a fine plan, Emma said, uncertain where this was leading. The thing is, Grant continued, a ranch needs more than one pair of hands to run it, and a home needs, well, it needs someone who knows how to make it one. He cleared his throat, suddenly looking uncomfortable. I'm not proposing marriage, Emma. I wouldn't presume. But I am offering you a place to stay, work that pays, and safety for you and your child, at least until you decide what you want to do. Emma stared at him, stunned by the offer. You barely know me. I know enough, Grant replied simply. I know you're determined to protect your child. I know you've got grit to have made it this far alone. Those are qualities I admire. What would people think? A single woman living on your property? There's a small cabin separate from the main house, Grant explained. It needs work, but it would be yours. As for what people think, he shrugged. I've never much cared for others' opinions, but if it eases your mind, we could tell folks you're a widow, hired as my housekeeper. Emma considered his offer. It seemed too good to be true, which in her experience meant it probably was. Why would you do this? Grant's expression grew distant. My mother was left in a similar situation when I was young. No one helped her when she needed it most. His eyes refocused on Emma. I couldn't help her then, but I can help you now. The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable. Still, Emma hesitated. I'd need to earn my keep. I won't be a charity case. I wouldn't have it any other way, Grant assured her. I need someone to cook, keep house, maybe help with the garden come spring. After your baby comes, we can renegotiate your duties. Everything fair and above board. It was more than Emma had dared hope for, yet caution still held her back. Could I see this land first, before I decide? Grant smiled, clearly pleased by her practical question. Of course. I plan to finalize the purchase tomorrow. We could ride out the day after if you're up to it. Emma nodded slowly. I'd like that. As they left the cafe, Emma felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. For the first time in months, she had a plan, tentative as it might be, and someone who seemed genuinely concerned for her welfare. It was too soon to fully trust Grant Russell, but something told her he was a man of his word. The next day passed in a blur of activity. Grant spent the morning at the land office, finalizing his purchase. In the afternoon, he took Emma to the general store, insisting on buying basic supplies she would need: a proper coat, sturdy boots, a hairbrush, and other necessities she had been forced to do without. Consider it an advance on your wages, he said when she protested. That evening, over dinner at the boarding house, Grant spread out a roughly drawn map of his new property. The main house is here, he explained, pointing to a spot near a creek. It's simple 2 bedrooms, a living area, kitchen. Needs some work, but it's solid. The smaller cabin is about 100 yards away, originally built for a ranch hand, I believe. Emma studied the map, trying to picture the place that might become her home. How far is it from town? About 7 miles, Grant replied. Not too remote, but far enough to have privacy. Privacy. The word struck Emma as a luxury she hadn't considered in months. The chance to have her own space, to raise her child away from judging eyes, was almost too much to hope for. It sounds perfect, she said softly. Grant seemed pleased by her response. We'll see what you think when you see it. The reality might be less impressive than the description. I don't need impressive, Emma assured him. Just safe. The following morning dawned clear and crisp. Grant had arranged for a wagon and a gentle mare for Emma to ride. He helped her up onto the cushioned seat, conscious of her condition. It's a smooth road most of the way, he promised, as he climbed up beside her and took the reins. But tell me if you need to stop and rest. The journey took them through rolling hills covered in sagebrush, past scattered pines that grew more numerous as they gained elevation. Emma found herself relaxing as they traveled, the open landscape soothing her city-worn nerves. Grant pointed out landmarks and wildlife, naming plants she'd never seen before. There it is, he said finally, as they crested a rise. Russell Ranch. Below them, a small valley opened up, bisected by a clear creek that gleamed silver in the midday sun. A modest wooden house stood near a cluster of cottonwood trees, with a smaller cabin visible a short distance away. A barn and corral completed the picture, all surrounded by acres of good grazing land that stretched to distant hills. "It's beautiful," Emma breathed, taking in the peaceful scene. "It needs work," Grant cautioned, "but it has potential." As they drove closer, Emma could see what he meant. The buildings were weathered, in need of paint and minor repairs. The yard around the house was overgrown, and the corral fence sagged in places. But the structures were sound, and the setting was more picturesque than anything she had imagined. Grant helped her down from the wagon and gave her a tour of the property, starting with the main house. Inside, it was dusty but well built, with high ceilings and windows that let in ample light. The furniture was sparse: a table and chairs in the kitchen, a worn sofa in the living room, and basic beds in the bedrooms left behind by the previous owner. "I'll sleep here," Grant explained, showing her the smaller of the two bedrooms. "The larger room can be used for storage until you decide if you want to move into the main house after getting to know me better. I understand if you prefer the privacy of the cabin for now." Emma appreciated his consideration of her comfort and reputation. "Thank you. I think the cabin would be best to start." The cabin, when they reached it, was a single room with a small lean-to kitchen. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and a narrow bed stood in the corner. It was humble but cozy, and most importantly, it would be hers. "The roof is sound," Grant said, glancing up at the ceiling. "We can have this cleaned and ready for you to move in by tomorrow, if you'd like to stay." Emma walked to the small window, looking out at the view of the creek and distant hills. A sense of peace settled over her that she hadn't felt in a long time. "Yes," she said, turning to face Grant. "I would like that very much." The relief and pleasure on Grant's face was evident. "Then it's settled. Welcome to your new home, Emma." They returned to town that afternoon, and Grant immediately set about making arrangements for their move to the ranch. He hired a local boy to help clean the cabin and main house, purchased additional supplies, and arranged for deliveries of food and necessities to be sent out the following week. Emma found herself caught up in his enthusiasm, making lists of what would be needed to turn the buildings into proper homes. For the first time in months, she was thinking beyond mere survival, allowing herself to plan for a future that might hold some measure of happiness. The next day, they moved to the ranch. Emma's few belongings fit easily in a single carpet bag, a stark reminder of how little she had left. But as she placed her hairbrush on the small table beside the bed in the cabin, arranged her spare dress in the chest of drawers, and hung her new shawl on a peg by the door, the space began to feel like her own. Grant had been true to his word. The cabin had been thoroughly cleaned, the chimney swept, and fresh linens placed on the bed. A basket of food staples sat on the kitchen table, along with a small vase of wildflowers, a touch Emma suspected was Grant's doing, though he didn't mention it. "I'll leave you to settle in," Grant said from the doorway. "I've got work to do on the main house. Dinner at 6, unless you're too tired." "Dinner sounds fine," Emma replied. "I'll cook. It's time I started earning my keep." Grant looked like he might protest, but then nodded. "All right, but tomorrow we'll work out a proper schedule of duties that won't tax you too much in your condition." After he left, Emma sat on the edge of the bed, running her hands over the clean quilt. Outside the window, the afternoon sun filtered through the trees, casting dappled shadows across the floor. The only sounds were the rustle of leaves in the breeze and the distant murmur of the creek. For the first time since Edward had abandoned her, Emma felt safe, not just temporarily sheltered, but truly safe. Grant Russell was still largely a stranger to her, but her instincts told her he was a man of honor. Whether that was enough to build a life upon remained to be seen. But for now, it was a foundation she could accept. The next weeks fell into a gentle rhythm. Grant worked from sunrise to sunset, repairing fences, patching the barn roof, and preparing for the cattle he planned to purchase in the spring. Emma kept house, cooking meals that grew more elaborate as supplies improved, cleaning, and gradually adding small touches that made both buildings more homelike. Despite her pregnancy, she insisted on contributing her fair share of work, though Grant often tried to lighten her load. They argued good-naturedly about it, with Emma usually prevailing. "I'm with child, not made of glass," she told him one afternoon, when he protested her hanging curtains in the main house. "Besides, nesting is what expectant mothers do. It's natural." Grant had raised his hands in surrender. Far be it from me to argue with nature. As the days passed, they learned each other's habits and preferences. Grant discovered that Emma loved to read, but had been forced to leave her books behind when she fled her husband's abandoned debts. On his next trip to town, he returned with 3 volumes from the small bookshop. Simple novels that brought tears to her eyes when he presented them. Emma, in turn, learned that Grant had a sweet tooth he tried to hide, and began baking treats that made his eyes light up when he came in for supper. It was a small way to repay his kindness, one that gave her genuine pleasure. They talked during meals and in the evenings, slowly revealing pieces of their pasts. Emma learned that Grant had grown up in Missouri, that his father had died in a mining accident when he was 7, leaving his mother to raise him alone until consumption took her 10 years later. He'd worked cattle drives since he was 17, saving every penny toward his dream of his own ranch. Grant learned about Emma's childhood in Pennsylvania, her schoolteacher parents who had died in a fire when she was 18, leaving her with few options in a town that held too many painful memories. The advertisement for a mail-order bride had seemed like providence at the time, a chance for a new start in a new place. "I don't regret coming west," she told Grant one evening as they sat on the porch of the main house, watching the sunset paint the hills gold and pink. "Just the choice I made in a husband." "Edward was a fool," Grant said quietly, his eyes on the horizon. Emma glanced at him, surprised by the vehemence in his voice. "Perhaps, or perhaps just weak. Not everyone is cut out for the challenges of frontier life. That doesn't excuse abandoning his responsibilities to you and to your child." Emma rested her hand on her belly, which had grown noticeably in the weeks since they had arrived at the ranch. "No, it doesn't, but dwelling on it serves no purpose. I need to look forward, not back." Grant turned to her then, his expression serious. "You're a remarkable woman, Emma Osbourne." The warmth in his voice made Emma's cheeks flush, and she looked away, suddenly flustered. "I'm just practical, and stubborn, as my mother always said." "Stubborn can be a virtue out here," Grant replied with a smile, "especially when paired with courage." Such moments of connection were becoming more frequent between them, moments when Emma caught herself wondering what it might be like if their arrangement were more than employer and housekeeper. But she quickly pushed such thoughts away. Her heart had been wrong once before. She couldn't afford to make the same mistake again, especially with a child to consider. As her 7th month of pregnancy began, Emma's energy waned. Grant insisted on hiring a local woman, Mrs. Blackwell, to come 3 times a week to help with the heavier housework. Emma protested the expense, but Grant was adamant. "Your job now is to take care of yourself and that baby," he told her firmly. "The rest can wait." One crisp November morning, Emma woke to the sound of hammering. Curious, she dressed and made her way outside to find Grant working on something behind the main house. "What are you building?" she called as she approached. Grant straightened, wiping sweat from his brow despite the cool air. "It was supposed to be a surprise," he said, looking slightly chagrined. Emma came closer to see a half-built cradle, the wood sanded smooth, the joints fitted with careful precision. "Oh, Grant," she breathed, running her fingers over the polished wood. "It's beautiful." "It's not finished yet," he said, sounding almost shy. "I wanted to have it done before the baby comes." Emma felt tears spring to her eyes. "Thank you. This means more than I can say." Grant's gaze held hers for a long moment, and something passed between them, an unspoken acknowledgement of feelings neither was ready to name. "Well," he said finally, clearing his throat, "I should get back to work if it's going to be ready in time." Emma nodded and retreated to the cabin, her thoughts in turmoil. Grant's gesture had touched her deeply, reminding her that he wasn't just providing shelter and employment, he was preparing for her child's arrival, as if it mattered to him personally. That evening, as they sat at the kitchen table in the main house after dinner, Emma found the courage to ask the question that had been on her mind. "Grant, what happens after the baby is born?" He looked up from the ledger he'd been reviewing. "What do you mean?" "Our arrangement. You hired me as a housekeeper, but with a newborn, I won't be able to work as much, at least not at first." Grant set down his pencil. "Emma, I didn't bring you here just for your cooking and cleaning, though both are excellent. I brought you here because you needed a safe place, and I could provide it." He hesitated, then added, "I don't expect you to maintain the same duties once the baby arrives. We'll adjust." "But that's not fair to you," Emma protested. "You're paying me wages, providing a home, and gaining companionship I didn't realize how much I needed." Grant interrupted gently. "Before you came, I was alone out here with nothing but plans and hard work. Now—" He gestured around the kitchen, which Emma had transformed with curtains, a tablecloth, and small touches that made it warm and inviting. "Now, this feels like a home. That's worth more than I can say." Emma felt a lump form in her throat. "I've been thinking," she said carefully. "After the baby comes, after I've recovered, perhaps I could move into the main house, the larger bedroom you mentioned. It would make more sense practically speaking. I could better attend to my duties if I weren't running back and forth to the cabin." Grant's expression was carefully neutral. "If that's what you want, the room is yours. But don't feel obligated on my account." "It's not obligation," Emma assured him. "It's preference." A slow smile spread across Grant's face, warming his eyes. "In that case, I'll start preparing the room tomorrow." The moment felt significant, a step towards something neither was ready to define, but both were beginning to want. December brought snow to the high desert, transforming the landscape into a glittering wonderland. The ranch was snug against the cold, with wood stacked high beside both buildings, and the pantry well stocked for winter. Grant had purchased his first small herd of cattle, which grazed in the lower pastures where the snow was thinner. He spent his days checking on them, ensuring they had access to water and supplemental feed when necessary. Emma, now in her 8th month, had moved into the main house as planned. Her bedroom was cozy, with a view of the mountains to the east. The completed cradle stood in the corner, ready for its occupant. Grant had surprised her again by adding delicate carvings to the headboard's small stars and a crescent moon that she traced with her fingers each night before sleeping. They settled into a new routine, sharing meals and quiet evenings by the fire. Sometimes Grant read aloud from one of Emma's books while she mended clothing or worked on the baby blanket she was knitting. Other times they simply talked, their conversations ranging from practical ranch matters to deeper discussions of hopes and beliefs. On Christmas Eve, Grant returned from town with packages wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. "I know we agreed no gifts," he said, looking slightly embarrassed as he placed them under the small pine tree they had decorated with paper stars and strung berries. "But I couldn't resist." "Then you won't mind that I disobeyed as well," Emma replied with a smile, retrieving a package from her room. They agreed to wait until morning to open them, in keeping with tradition. That night, they sat before the fire, drinking hot cider, the room illuminated only by the tree's candles and the hearth's glow. "I never expected this," Grant said quietly, his gaze on the flames. "Expected what?" "This feeling, like I've found something I didn't know I was missing." Emma's heart quickened at his words. "I know what you mean," she admitted. "When Edward left, I thought my chance at happiness had ended before it truly began. I never imagined—" "That you'd end up on a remote ranch with a cattle-driving dreamer," Grant supplied with a wry smile. "That I'd find someone who makes me feel safe, valued." Emma hesitated, then added softly, "cherished." Grant turned to her, his expression suddenly serious. "You are cherished, Emma, more than I've had the courage to say." The air between them seemed still, charged with unspoken feelings. "Grant," Emma began, but a sharp pain cut off her words. She gasped, her hand flying to her belly. "Emma!" Grant was immediately alert, concern etched on his features. "What is it?" "I think—" Another pain gripped her, sharper than any she had felt before. "I think the baby is coming." Grant's eyes widened. "But it's too soon, isn't it?" "Only by a few weeks," Emma said, trying to keep her voice calm, despite the fear rising within her. "Babies come when they're ready, not according to our schedules." Despite his obvious alarm, Grant took charge of the situation with remarkable composure. He helped Emma to her bedroom, built up the fire, and put water on to boil. Then he pulled on his coat. "Mrs. Blackwell has delivered babies before," he explained, already heading for the door. "I'm going to fetch her. Will you be all right until I return?" Emma nodded, another contraction building. "I will. Hurry, but be careful. The snow—" "I'll be back as quickly as I can," Grant promised. "You rest and try not to worry." After he left, Emma paced the small room, recalling what little she knew about childbirth from books and the whispered conversations of married women. The pains were still far apart. She had time yet. She gathered clean linens, placed towels where they would be needed, and tried to prepare herself mentally for what was to come. As she moved about the room, her hand brushed the cradle, and a wave of emotion washed over her. Soon, her child would be here, would need her strength and love. The thought gave her courage. The hours that followed tested that courage to its limits. Mrs. Blackwell arrived with Grant just as Emma's labor intensified, bringing with her the confident efficiency of a woman who had helped bring many lives into the world. "Men aren't needed in the birthing room," she announced, shooing Grant out despite his reluctance to leave Emma's side. "Go boil more water and stay out from underfoot." Emma lost track of time as the night wore on, each contraction bringing pain that seemed unbearable until it passed, leaving her gasping and dreading the next. Mrs. Blackwell's calm presence anchored her, her weathered hands cool on Emma's forehead, her voice steady with encouragement. "You're doing fine, girl," she assured Emma as dawn approached. "Your baby's almost here. One more big push now." Emma summoned her remaining strength, bearing down with determination, born of exhaustion and a desperate desire to meet the child she had carried through so much hardship. And then, suddenly, it was over. A tiny, indignant cry filled the room as Mrs. Blackwell lifted a squirming, red-faced infant. "You have a son, Emma," the older woman announced with satisfaction. "A fine, healthy boy." Tears of joy and relief streamed down Emma's face as her son was placed in her arms. He was perfect 10 fingers, 10 toes, a thatch of dark hair, and eyes that, when they briefly opened, were the deep blue of all newborns. "Hello, little one," she whispered, touching his cheek with a trembling finger. "I've waited so long to meet you." After Mrs. Blackwell had cleaned up and ensured both mother and child were comfortable, she opened the door to admit Grant, who had been pacing the hallway for hours. He entered hesitantly, his expression a mixture of awe and uncertainty as he approached the bed where Emma sat propped against pillows, her son cradled in her arms. "Emma," he breathed, his voice thick with emotion. "Are you all right?" "We both are," she assured him, smiling despite her exhaustion. "Grant, meet William James Osbourne." She had chosen the names to honor her father and Grant's grandfather, whose stories had been part of their evening conversations. Grant stared down at the tiny bundle, wonder evident in his face. "He's amazing," he said softly. "May I?" Emma carefully transferred her son to Grant's arms, watching as the big man cradled the infant with infinite gentleness. Something shifted in her heart at the sight of certainty that this man, who had no obligation to her or her child, would nonetheless protect them both with everything he had. "Thank you," she said simply. Grant looked up, his eyes suspiciously bright. "For what?" "For bringing Mrs. Blackwell, for giving us a home, for—" Emma swallowed hard. "For caring about us." "Emma," Grant said, his voice low and serious as he returned William to her arms. "There's something I need to say, something I've been wanting to tell you for weeks now." Emma's heart quickened. "Yes?" "I love you," Grant said simply. "I think I started falling for you that first night in the saloon, when you showed such courage in the face of impossible choices. I've grown to love everything about you, your strength, your kindness, the way you've turned this house into a home." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "I don't expect anything from you. You've been through so much, and your focus needs to be on William now. But I wanted you to know, whatever happens, whatever you decide, my feelings won't change." Emma felt tears spring to her eyes again. "Oh, Grant," she whispered, "I love you too. I've been afraid to admit it, afraid to trust my heart again. But you've shown me what a good man truly is, not through words but through actions, day after day." Grant moved closer, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed. "Are you sure? I don't want you to feel obligated because of everything that's happened." "I'm sure," Emma said firmly. "This isn't gratitude or dependency. It's love, real and deep and true." Grant's smile lit his entire face. Gently, mindful of the baby between them, he leaned forward and kissed her a tender, reverent kiss that held the promise of a lifetime of love. When they parted, both were smiling through tears. William chose that moment to let out a tiny, indignant cry, as if reminding them of his presence. "He already has your sense of timing," Emma laughed softly. Grant gently touched the baby's head. "He's perfect, Emma, just like his mother." As the first light of Christmas morning filtered through the window, Emma looked at the man beside her and the child in her arms, overwhelmed by the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the depths of desperation in a dusty saloon to the joy of a new family in a home filled with love, it was more than she had dared to hope for, yet somehow exactly what she needed. The days and weeks that followed were a blur of adjustment as Emma and Grant adapted to life with a newborn. William proved to be a generally content baby, though he had definite opinions about when he should be fed and held. Grant took to fatherhood with unexpected ease, seemingly untroubled by middle-of-the-night crying or diaper changes. "I've broken wild horses and faced down rustlers," he told Emma when she expressed surprise at his patience. "A baby is challenging in different ways, but far more rewarding." January brought heavy snow that isolated the ranch for nearly 2 weeks. They were well prepared with supplies, and the forced confinement gave them time to discuss their future. Grant proposed marriage, not out of obligation, but out of love and a desire to make their family official. "William should have my name," he said, as they sat before the fire one evening, the baby sleeping peacefully in his cradle. "And you should have my ring if you'll accept it." Emma's answer was an emphatic yes. They planned to marry in the spring, when travel was easier and the ranch work less demanding. Grant wanted to give Emma a proper wedding, with a new dress and flowers and whatever would make the day special for her. February brought the first signs of the coming season: longer days, occasional thaws, and the earliest wildflowers pushing through patches of melting snow. William grew stronger daily, his personality emerging in smiles and coos that delighted both his mother and the man who would soon be his father in name as well as in heart. Grant continued to work on the ranch, preparing for the spring calving and planning expansions to both the herd and the buildings. Emma gradually resumed her duties, but Grant insisted on hiring additional help so she could focus primarily on William. "I want you to enjoy being a mother," he told her. "The rest can be managed." Emma found herself falling more deeply in love with Grant with each passing day. His unwavering support, his gentle strength, and the tenderness he showed both her and William continually affirmed that her heart had chosen wisely this time. In March, when the roads were finally clear enough for travel, they made the journey to Carson City to be married by a proper judge, with Mrs. Blackwell and her husband as witnesses. Emma wore a new dress of deep blue silk, Grant's gift, and carried wildflowers he had gathered that morning. William, now 3 months old, was dressed in a tiny suit that Mrs. Blackwell had sewn for the occasion. The ceremony was simple but meaningful, the promises exchanged with voices steady with certainty. When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, Grant kissed Emma with a passion that brought applause from their small audience and a blush to her cheeks. "Mrs. Russell," he whispered against her ear, "I've been waiting to call you that." "It sounds perfect," she replied, her heart so full it seemed it might overflow. They celebrated with a meal at the finest restaurant in Carson City, then spent the night at a hotel, their first night as a married couple, with Mrs. Blackwell caring for William back at the ranch. It was a magical interlude, a chance to express their love without constraints or interruptions. The next morning, as they prepared to return home, Emma found herself reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this point. Less than a year ago, she had stood in a saloon, desperate and alone, selling herself to survive. Now she was a beloved wife, a mother, and mistress of a ranch that was beginning to thrive under their care. "What are you thinking about?" Grant asked as he loaded their bags into the wagon. "You look miles away." Emma smiled, reaching up to touch his face. "I was thinking about how life can change so completely, so quickly. How the darkest moment can lead to the greatest joy." Grant covered her hand with his own. "I thank God every day that I walked into that saloon when I did, that I found you." "We found each other," Emma corrected gently, "and in doing so, found everything we needed." As they drove back to the ranch to their home, Emma held William close, watching the landscape unfold before them. The hills were turning green with new growth, the promise of renewal evident in every budding tree and flowering plant. Life would not always be easy. She knew that well. There would be challenges ahead, difficult seasons, tight finances, the everyday trials of building a life together. But with Grant beside her, with the love that had grown between them, Emma faced the future not with fear, but with confidence and joy. The sun was setting as they crested the final hill before the ranch came into view. In the golden light, the buildings looked warm and welcoming, a sanctuary they had created together. "Welcome home, Mrs. Russell," Grant said, his arm around her shoulders. Emma leaned into his embrace, their son cradled between them. "Home," she echoed, the word filled with all the meaning she had once feared lost forever. "Yes, we're home at last." As spring gave way to summer, the Russell Ranch blossomed under their care. The cattle herd grew, the gardens flourished, and William thrived, becoming a cheerful, curious baby who filled their days with laughter and their nights with peaceful contentment. Grant proved to be everything Emma had hoped for in a husband: kind, hard-working, and endlessly supportive. He treated William as his own son in every way, spending hours with the boy as he began to crawl and explore his world. And in the privacy of their bedroom, he showed Emma a passion that healed the last lingering wounds from her first marriage, teaching her that physical love could be a beautiful expression of genuine emotion rather than a duty or transaction. By William's first birthday, the ranch had become known in the territory for its well-bred cattle and the warm hospitality offered by its mistress. Neighbors who had initially been curious about the unusual circumstances of Emma's arrival had long since accepted her as Grant's wife without question or judgment. That evening, after William had been put to bed with his new wooden horse carefully carved by Grant over many evenings, Emma and Grant sat on the porch, watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. "I have something to tell you," Emma said, her voice soft but filled with joy. "Something I've suspected for a few weeks now." Grant turned to her, curiosity in his eyes. "What is it, love?" "I'm with child again," Emma told him, reaching for his hand. "Due in the winter, I believe." Grant's face lit with wonder and delight. "Emma," he breathed, gathering her into his arms. "That's wonderful news." "You're happy then?" Emma asked, though his reaction left little doubt. "Happier than I can say," Grant assured her, kissing her tenderly. "Another child to love, another piece of our family complete." As they sat together in the gathering darkness, Emma reflected on how far they had come from that fateful night in the Silver Dollar Saloon. Grant had purchased her freedom that night, not her body, a distinction that had meant everything. And in the process, he had given her something beyond price, a chance at true love, at a family bound by choice rather than obligation, at a life filled with dignity and joy. The baby stirred within her, a tiny reminder of the future they were building, together, a future that had seemed impossible in her darkest hours, but now stretched before her, bright with promise and possibility. "I love you, Grant Russell," Emma whispered, leaning her head against his shoulder. "And I love you, Emma Russell," he replied, his arm tightening around her, "always and forever." Above them, the stars continued their ancient dance across the Nevada sky, bearing witness to the miracle of love that had blossomed in the most unexpected of circumstances, a love that had transformed two lonely souls into a family and a house into a home. In the years that followed, the Russell Ranch prospered beyond their most optimistic expectations. Grant's careful management of the land and livestock, combined with Emma's shrewd handling of the household accounts, allowed them to expand their holdings and improve their facilities. They added a proper barn, enlarged the main house to accommodate their growing family, and even built a small schoolhouse for their children and those of neighboring ranches. Their second child, a daughter they named Catherine Grace, arrived on a snowy December night, with Mrs. Blackwell once again lending her experienced hands. Unlike William's dramatic Christmas Eve arrival, Catherine's birth was relatively straightforward, and Emma recovered quickly. Grant was as enchanted with his daughter as he had been with William, spending hours simply holding her and marveling at her tiny features. Emma often found him in the nursery, singing softly to Catherine, while William helped by patting his sister's hand and bringing her toys she was far too young to appreciate. By the time Catherine was walking, Emma was expecting their third child. James Allen Russell was born in the spring of 1878, a robust boy with his father's quiet temperament and his mother's curious mind. Life on the ranch settled into a rhythm marked by the seasons and the children's milestones. There were difficult times, a drought that threatened the cattle, a winter so severe they were snowed in for nearly a month, periods when money was tight and luxuries few. But through it all, the love between Emma and Grant only deepened, strengthened by shared challenges and mutual respect. William grew into a thoughtful, responsible boy who showed a natural affinity for ranching. By 10, he was helping his father with many aspects of the cattle operation, soaking up knowledge like a sponge. Though he knew Grant was not his biological father, the bond between them was unbreakable, forged in the daily interactions of a man who had chosen to be a parent in every way that mattered. Catherine, with her mother's auburn hair and her father's steady gaze, developed into a spirited girl with a talent for horses and an unexpected head for business. When Emma started a small side venture, selling preserves and baked goods to the growing town of Owyhee, it was Catherine who suggested packaging and pricing strategies that increased their profits substantially. James, the youngest, was the dreamer of the family, always with his nose in a book, always asking questions about the world beyond the ranch. Grant encouraged his curiosity, bringing him books from trips to larger towns and spending evenings discussing ideas that many would have considered beyond a child's understanding. As the children grew, Emma and Grant made a point of telling them the story of how they met the truth, not a sanitized version. They believed the children deserved to know their history, including the desperate circumstances that had brought Emma to the Silver Dollar Saloon and the courageous decision Grant had made to help a stranger in need. "Your father bought my freedom that night. Not my body," Emma would explain. "It's an important distinction, one that speaks to his character and the kind of man he truly is." The children absorbed this story not with shame, but with pride in their parents' resilience and love. It became a foundational tale in their family lore, a reminder that true worth is measured not by circumstances, but by choices. In 1885, 10 years after Grant and Emma had met, they held a celebration at the ranch, an anniversary party that brought together friends, neighbors, and even a few relatives who had reconnected with them over the years. The property, once a modest homestead with more potential than actual development, had become one of the most prosperous ranches in the territory. The main house now boasted a proper dining room that could accommodate 20 guests, a parlor with Emma's prized piano, a 5th anniversary gift from Grant, and bedrooms for each of the children. The grounds included not only the essential ranch buildings, but also gardens that were Emma's pride and joy, an orchard beginning to bear fruit, and a pond where the children swam in summer and skated in winter. As twilight fell on the celebration, guests gathered on the expanded porch to watch the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and pink. Emma found herself standing slightly apart, overwhelmed by the fullness of her life compared to the emptiness she had known before. Grant approached, slipping his arm around her waist. "Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. Russell." Emma smiled up at him, still finding the same thrill in his touch that she had felt in the early days of their marriage. "I was thinking about journeys," she said softly, "how the most difficult paths sometimes lead to the most beautiful destinations." Grant's eyes, crinkled now with a decade of smiles, held hers with understanding. "I wouldn't change a step of our path, even the hardest ones. They all led us here, to this moment, to this life we've built together." "Nor would I," Emma agreed, leaning into his embrace. "Each trial shaped us, prepared us for each other, and for the family we've created." From the yard came the sound of children's laughter as William led a game of tag, Catherine's red braids flying as she chased her younger brother. The sight filled Emma's heart with a joy so profound it bordered on pain. "Do you remember that night in the saloon?" Grant asked quietly. "How frightened you were. How desperate." "I remember everything about that night," Emma replied. "The shame, the fear, and then the disbelief when you stepped forward. I thought you were just another man looking to take advantage." Grant chuckled softly. "I wasn't exactly smooth in my rescue attempt." "You were perfect," Emma contradicted, turning to face him fully. "You saw my humanity when others saw only merchandise. You gave me back my dignity, my hope." She reached up to touch his face, tracing the familiar contours with gentle fingers. "You saved more than just my life that night, Grant Russell. You saved my soul." Grant caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "And you gave meaning to mine. Before you, I had plans and ambitions, but nothing that truly mattered. You and the children, you're the heart of everything I do, everything I am." Their moment of reflection was interrupted by William, calling for them to join the gathering around the bonfire that had been lit in the yard. Hand in hand, they walked down the porch steps to join their guests and children. As the stars appeared overhead, Emma looked around at the life they had built, from nothing but love and determination. William, now 11 and showing signs of the man he would become. Catherine, 8 and fearlessly confident. James, 6 and already asking questions about the stars above them. And Grant, still her rock, her partner, her love, the man who had seen value in her when she had forgotten her own worth. From desperation in a saloon to this abundance of joy, it was a journey Emma could scarcely have imagined in her darkest hours. Yet, here she stood, surrounded by love, secure in the knowledge that, whatever challenges the future might hold, they would face them together, just as they always had. As the fire cast its warm glow over the gathered faces, Emma's heart overflowed with gratitude for the man who had bought her freedom, not her body, and in doing so, had given her the greatest gift of all, a life filled with love, purpose, and belonging. A true home, at last.